important issue. The green revolution is far beyond the production of green cars or other alternatives to measure down all the pollution in the world, but also in the terms of agriculture. The traditional agro industries are sizing down a little bit more, and they've seen the result that land is deteriorating and the ecology is being disturbed. So to take us through this topic, I shall introduce you to our panel for experts in their own field. We've met them earlier on. Let's start off, let's go clockwise. Carl Augustine, he's very well known here in St. Lucia. He's a professional, he's a forest engineer. Let me check it out. A forest engineer by training, and he's assisting the St. Lucian government. He's a Dominican native. Next to him is Mr. Steve Maximine. Okay, Steve from Trinidad and Tobago, Steve Maximine. He's a front runner in watching climate change. He'll tell you a little bit more about it himself. Next to him is Mr. Lennox Lemkin. I've had a pleasure to meet him earlier yesterday, and I learned that he's not only a scientist but a kind of new farmer in his own right. And last to introduce is Mr. Christopher Cox, St. Lucian national with a scientific degree in forest resources management, and he's been involved in a number of programs dealing with issues like the one we discussed earlier this morning.
Well, I begin by saying that we need to be conscious of the fact that agriculture and farming, a farm really should be an ecosystem. In other words, each product on the farm should contribute to other parts of the ecosystem. Industrial farming, as we know today, is one of the major contaminants of industrial environmental contamination. They contribute to a large extent to industrial to environmental contamination, because over time, and particularly in the Caribbean, we have had a system of sort of a monoculture. We had the banana, the times of bananas, we had sugar, and as a result, we tend to create an environment where pests and diseases tend to develop. And one of the things that we don't realize is that while we use chemicals to suppress the spread of these things, we don't realize often that the lifespan of these insects and pests is very short, and they mutate maybe 100 times over our lifetime. And as a result, we tend to get into using too much chemicals and more chemicals and more chemicals, and what it really ends up, what we end up doing is we end up destroying the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I want to give the floor to Steve, and the question that we can draw right away is how should farmers and other people involved in agriculture be guided by people like you who know everything about climate change? What are the two mechanisms that they should be aware of?
Somebody put you up to that.
Greg.
That sounds like a Greg Lee's question.
Gregarian.
Yeah, Gregarian. Yeah. But, no, I think just the basic premise of your question is off. I mean, there's nothing that any one person, as gifted, as talented as they might be, like I am, could give you the criticism. No, but seriously. No. I think we approach it from the wrong way if we think that it is a matter of fixing. This is not about fixing. I know that we had a session on redesigning and retrofitting, but it implied that what we had is working, has worked, needs some tweaking maybe, but we don't need experts telling us what to do. This whole topic of growing green and clean is just about tradition. All of the systems that we are harping on now and putting fancy names to, integrated pest management was always integrated pest management. My grandparents used the same thing, what it meant going out in the evening with a torchlight, soaking some grapefruit skins and following it to the nest and getting some hot water and pouring it into the nest. We all knew how to produce green and clean. What happened to us is that we were asked to make this transition into commercial farming, using a model that was developed elsewhere, using seed that was grown and produced elsewhere as part of a system. So that I'm always flabbergasted by the people who keep saying now that they're going to go organic and use seed that has been bred for a traditional type system. I mean, it's just crazy. So that this whole business about growing green and growing clean is just about going back to roots, really and truly, but with a true scientific basis behind it. We did a lot of stuff before that we really didn't know, because there's always this disconnect between technology and science. There are some technologies that were developed long before the science was understood, and there are some scientific principles that we haven't applied proper technology to as yet. And what has happened is that a lot of the things that we did traditionally, almost by rote, had solid science behind it. What we are called upon to do, and what people like me are called upon to do these days, is to almost reinvent the science, to tell people about the science behind what they're doing as to why those technologies work. But coming back to the original premise, I want to take issue with what my little young colleague said earlier this morning about the predictability of the climate. When you're talking about 3 and 4 months, we're talking weather. You're not discussing climate. Climate isn't discussed in 3 and 4 month intervals. People don't ask you what's the climate like in St. Lucia. They ask what's the weather like. Climate evolves over a long period of time. And I'm not giving it's not an argument. The thing is, I sat with Adrian at fora all over the world where we're talking about the implications of this weather variability, climate variability. It matters not what you call it, you know. I don't care if we are going through a 1,000-year cycle. The fact is, we are in the 1,000th year. It matters not whether it's going to take another 1,000 years for us to have such a skewed weather pattern again. We are living it now. Those of us in small island states cannot sit by and say this is going to pass. It's not going to pass. There are significant changes, measurable, identified changes, and I don't care whether you label it climate change, weather variability, is happening now. So do we agree, Ms. Holder, that it's happening now, that there are changes taking place now? Right, good. So that's all I'm interested in. I'm not interested in the name, you see? So whether we feel it's climate change or climate variability, the rest of the world, though, is marching headlong on the premise that what we have here is something significant. So that the new quality standard in agriculture today is not price. There was a time when you produce a food item, people came, they looked, the cheapest one, they went for that. Then there was a food safety era where people started thinking, oh, well, no, this isn't produce safety. Now, even though it's affordable and it's safe, people are interested on the carbon footprint. And that is the new quality dynamic. And that is why we have to be so concerned about going green and being concerned about climate change and the kinds of technologies that will allow us to exploit that. And I say exploit rather than explore because we have to exploit it.
Carl, are Caribbean governments aware of the fact that this is a new age? Or that we're closer to the future than we think?
Yeah, it's a big one. I think that in by and large, yes, they are. I mean, right now you hear more talk about climate change and climate change issues. Right now you have more probably cross-section, cross-sectoral networking and so on. And basically, since a lot of those frameworks are not necessarily developed locally, but are international bodies or international movements, like it or not, the governments can't really escape from from those policies or from those set laws or rules which are being put in place. If you look at it, it is necessary for us to look at if the Caribbean does not adapt to the current trend or the current setting internationally, we will have serious issues, or we already have serious issues in terms of food security and so on, and those will only get worse. I mean, if you look at our agricultural sector, as it was said earlier, it has been declining. Even if, in some instances, our population has risen, and even if right now one could argue with the fact that our tourism industries have grown so widely, you have more mouths to feed, more prospects for farmers to make money. But if you look at it in reality, less people are making a living on agriculture. I think it is also essential for us to look at, as Steve said, it's not necessarily science. Some of the technology that is needed existed for millennia. If you look at, for example, the indigenous people which occupied our territories before, they used to make use of, let's say they kill a pig, they used to make use of every part of that pig. If you look at, for example, agriculture right now, take banana, something that we used to do a lot of in St. Lucia, and we still do a lot of in St. Lucia. We are still, 50 years after the first set of bananas were planted, only selling a bunch of bananas, the fruit. We have not developed any framework for us to utilize, for example, the tree to use as fibers. We have not utilized, for example, even explored utilizing certain parts of the bananas to utilize as feeds or something. So the issue is there is a need for us to be innovative and to think outside of the box. But it is difficult to actually get that from a government point of view. Because as you know, government is not really the most efficient bodies that you have in those islands. So you definitely have a big role for the private sector. And for people, even outside of the agricultural field, agricultural sector, to start seeing the opportunities, the business opportunities, the monetary opportunities which lies within agriculture. I mean, one of the biggest issues that we have right now in St. Lucia is the state of our rivers. When you look at the rivers, we had an issue before, for example, of the damage done by the monoculture of bananas and the pesticides and so on, the agro-pesticides used. But right now I could say, yes, St. Lucia is becoming more and more self-reliant in our pop production, but that pop production is having a heavy cost on the same rivers that we used to have issues with the agrochemicals. But at the same time now, while most of that big production, the waste is dumped in the rivers and it be creating an environmental issue for us, this could be a prospect to make money. Where, for example, if you create the linkages between the farmers and, let's say, other farming groups, instead of they dumping the peat manure into the river, they do things like, for example, holding tanks. A business, not an agriculture, it's a businessman, a businesswoman, see the opportunity of buying that very low price from the farmer, taking that waste off their hands, converting that waste into energy, the form of methane generators and so on, electricity that could be sold either back to the electrical company or utilized locally for production and so on. But they also have a secondary, a third product as well, which is the organic matter, this organic manure, which could be sold back to the farmers around and reduce their dependence on agrochemicals.
Well, thank you and good morning to all. It's very hard to come to a forum like that and figure out what has been said or what we can contribute that hasn't been said before. Because all the things we've spoken about for years. Those of you, I know many of you in the room, we work together in the Ministry of Agriculture, I've worked with the Forestry Department, that's where I cut my teeth in that. And yeah, we're still seeing a lot that can be done, but there are a lot of deficiencies, a lot of dysfunctionalities in the system. There's dysfunctionalities in the governance system for example, land management. Okay, I'll talk a bit about climate change, but land management actually, and that's based on my own experience, is really where we have the greatest dysfunction, I think, in all these small islands. It's really land administration. It's not actually a farmer cutting a piece of steep slope and so on. It's how land is treated within commercial markets. how land is traded, how land is passed on through inheritance and so on. It makes it very difficult actually to make productive agriculture and make agriculture sustainable when you're talking about consideration of soil erosion minimization, water channel pollution and so on. All the problems we are having in terms of riverbank degradation, which we've seen and is borne out in the major way the land is denuded after hurricanes and so on, has a lot to do with the way land is administered. Right? And that then around goes back into how water is managed. When we talk about water management, actually, it's really land management. You don't really manage the water, you don't really manage the rain that falls out of the sky. You don't really manage the water that runs in the river. You divert it across other landscapes. You have to modify the land, you have to do certain things. There's certain easements you need to abide. Where there are no easements and no setbacks, things happen, there are consequences. So really the land is a big problem as far as I can tell. And the policies on land management in many of the countries are almost non-existent. We lack land zoning plans. The most implemented. All right, sorry. I know, for example, some countries have made some process towards land zoning. I know in Barbados, for example, they have land zoning that actually has to do with the well recharges, right? They have these 5 zones in Barbados where there's some limitations on activities. In St. Lucia, we did for many years. A lot of my research actually was looking at land zoning for agriculture, following the FAO methodology, agroecological zoning, a big report generated. Not only mine, but other researchers before me. Okay? Passed on to the Ministry of Planning, sat with ministers and PSs and spoke about the issues of retaining land for agriculture, land banks, for example, but they've really not gone very far. And it's a challenge that I don't know if there's any one solution for it per se, but it does take a lot of championship, I think. Where you find there's a lot of technocrats go through the system, continue producing reports and so on, consultants, but you don't find at the end of any one major event that there's a champion. Like for example in St. Lucia, Hurricane Thomas went through. Okay, I have not heard really anything substantive that has said, look, we need to reform land policy because this has happened.
We're glad you mentioned that part of water management because right next door, the World Bank and CDB are holding a workshop about safe water supply and sanitation. That's another field of problems that we'll have to face and we'll have to challenge. Carl mentioned earlier on that the use of waste for cleaner energy. I want to make a roundup with all of you for panelists on the relationship between alternative farming and getting clean energy out of farming products. Like, if I can mention it, at home in Suriname, there are ongoing plans to use the waste of paddy to make clean energy for that particular agricultural district close to Guyana, as some of you might know. So maybe the panel can give us a roundup on, the link between alternative agriculture and cleaner energy. Who's going to start?
We are fortunate to be in the one country in the region where there are still vestigial remains of the 3 main sources of energy in sugar plantations. If you go out to Fonda now, you'll see the water wheel, you'll see the windmill, well, remnants of the windmill, and the animal powering, where the animals were yoked and walked around in a circle, and you had gears connecting that to the sugar mill. So that we have all of these technology, we understand all of these technology. We may not have the resources yet to capitalize on it fully. I remember deceased Professor Headley talking about solar air conditioning units for refrigerated trucks taking milk from one part of Guyana, bringing it into Georgetown. We were actually working on it just before he died. We were actually looking at some of those systems. You have photovoltaics, which is just using sunlight to power batteries, basically. So that there's no shortage of opportunity or technologies. Some of them have high initial costs. But we see what has happened with solar technology in terms of just the exploits of solar dynamics here. Only here in Barbados, not St. Lucia where there's a plant, but in Barbados as well, in terms of water heating. But we keep banding about these terms about energy use and alternative energy. I am not as keen about biofuels as most people seem to be. Biofuels is a temporary stopgap measure, because what you're actually seeing is that we're going to use some of the carbon dioxide that is floating around there already, lock it into a plant, and then release it back into the environment. So we're not really bringing down the ultimate levels, which I am told we're still looking at 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide to be fairly comfortable. We are 380 or something now. When all of us did O-level chemistry, and so we heard that, you know, you had how much percent nitrogen, how much percent oxygen, and it would be 0.003 or whatever it was of carbon dioxide. That has changed. That is measurable, that has changed. So that if we are going to be looking at alternative fuels or energy sources, I'm still into solar. I still think solar is a major way out. Wind, there are some new silent or close to silent wind technologies now, which are gaining acceptance. So that the growing of jatropha and looking at corn and so for biofuels, I'm not as keen. I'm sure they're going to pursue it, but I'm not as keen because I don't think it's a lasting solution. I think solar and wind would be, and some of the ocean technologies, and so that our boy Al Binger has been promoting across the world, you know. And the only reason that hasn't taken off, and if I'm to quote Al, is because the benefits are going to be more benefits for tropical countries than for first world countries, and that's why no money has been sunk into it. And I think that is going to be another wave of the future. Well, no pun intended. Another wave of the future that we're going to be able to use as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that part. And then
you were speaking earlier, and I know you came from the World Bank Water Workshop.
I have been there.
Right, but you plan to go there the whole rest of the week. And when I saw the agenda, I was trying to get one of the World Bank to come across it, because it's talking about water and win-win situations in water management. And I like what you said, you cannot manage water. You manage the land upon which it falls when you get it, or manage rain. I looked at the agenda, will there be any discussion in that agenda on the agricultural water issues? Or is it just pipe-borne water for domestic and commercial and industrial use? What about water for agriculture? And if not, how come? And as man comes to forestry and agriculture, can you put it on the table if it's not on the table?
Actually, that meeting is actually being held on behalf of water utility companies. So it's really potable water, the nature of that meeting. So I don't believe there's anything being discussed on terms of agriculture, if I remember what the agenda looks like. But in fact, a lot of farmers currently get their water supply from the potable system, even though it's chlorinated and high production water, but farmers do in fact use in a lot of places water from the water utility, right? So, sorry? Okay, yeah, so that could come on the agenda, but from what I understand from that particular meeting, I'm not going to be attending the whole forum, but certainly it's a question that can be asked, yes, because if, like I said, farmers are using water that comes from the supply, then it becomes an issue. Right? I know in other places, for example, they've developed institutional in some countries where you have like an irrigation authority, and that runs in parallel as another type of utility, like in Jamaica, the National Water, the Irrigation Authority, right? They run water to farmers in much the same way like the National Water Commission does for the potable supply for domestic users, industrial, and so on.
No, but you see, that is my point. I mean, that's the point about the disconnect. The water utilities feel that agricultural industry, and therefore they shouldn't be concerned about even getting involved in a discussion about water for agriculture. Not all countries that you mentioned has that irrigation entity. I remember some years back when I was in Antigua, the farmers were complaining that, even if they have a pond on their land, they cannot dig and use the water on their own land with the pond because it doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the water authority. So if the water utilities are the public sector organizations in charge of all the water in the country, and they're having discussion, and they don't see agriculture as an industry that utilizes a lot of water, not just in farming and livestock, and also in processing, then where are we having those discussions? Where are we going? We're sitting here talking about the future actual sustainability. We manage the land that the farms on. I mean, that's where the disconnect comes in terms of your inter-industry management and policy making, etc., etc.
Okay, let me use again the word dysfunction. So most countries actually, the statutory responsibility for water is vested in the water company. It's the case in Dominica, it's the case in St. Vincent, Trinidad, Grenada, Barbados. Most of the countries, St. Lucia, not. St. Lucia has changed because it has done the institutional reform in the legislation that sets up a water resources management agency, then sets up a water and sewage regulatory agency commission, all right? Where if you as a farmer needs to abstract or develop any water projects, you need to apply for a license that is informed by investigative research by the Water Resources Agency, then it's passed on to the Water and Sewage Commission. You apply for a license to develop water, right? So in that way, the governance of water resources is placed more in a central state role, as opposed to water utility context. Because what you're saying is absolutely right. Where it is right now in most of the countries, the water utilities, because of the legislation, they have responsibility for water, and they're very ill-equipped to handle the governance of water.
Because I was thinking to myself, you started saying that was price and food safety and now the carbon footprint. And I was a bit concerned because I felt that we always get into these phases and we often promote it and say, this is where we need to go. And I think that's what you said, this is what we need to do, etc. To tap into the opportunity. And you said everybody here looked confused. And I wonder if that's something that we always tend to do. Tell the stakeholders, let's go this way. And it is not appropriate for us, it's not applicable to us at the time. And we sometimes can't meet the requirements and we rush into it. And by the time we catch up, people have moved on and gone on to something else, and we are still playing catch up. And as you said, nobody is really interested in carbon footprint. So you offer a product and say this, we have a good or limited carbon footprint, and nobody here will really care. Just like when we spoke about organic, and nobody really is doing organic, nobody's certifying, nobody wants to pay organic prices. So this new carbon footprint thing, I'm just wondering if it's really applicable. And if we don't have to be more innovative and tap into other opportunities. If the tourists are interested in carbon footprint, what percentage of our market is really towards the tourists who come whether in cruise ships or in hotels? And if they want to know what carbon footprint, can we promote something else like indigenous bacon saltfish from St. Lucia and ignore the carbon footprint but highlight other things that are more innovative and indigenous?
All right, I agree with you, Alistair, that it is, we are on, I suppose, the crest of the wave. We didn't invent this thing, we didn't invent this concern, but I'm saying that it is a wave that has been sweeping through the way some of the importers, some of the people who buy our produce, I'm speaking now particularly out of the banana experience with fair trade. I'm talking about the kinds of advertisements and online presence you see for Sainsbury and Tesco. I mean, China, you could help me with some of this, right? In terms of they are stating as a marketing fact, as a marketing tool, that they are transporting their produce by rail rather than by trucks because of the lower carbon footprint. Now, whether you think all of that is fluff, whether you think all of that is just greening, it doesn't matter. The fact, the hard reality is that that is what they're using as a quality standard now. We have tourists that are coming to this part of the world. I'm now talking about a marketing thing for the hoteliers now in particular.
What percentage are they?
Wait. I'm saying that if you look at the carbon footprint in food as an indication of quality, they hired, I'm using a Trinidad example for you, Alistair. They hired their previous marketing manager, the Irish guy. He was purchasing based on the fact that part of the marketing of the Hyatt as a premium or premier location in terms of safety and low carbon footprint activity. That is why he was buying all this stuff from us up in Lopido. So I'm telling you that even in terms of establishment that is geared towards the local population, because I mean, you look at you look at dinner time at the Hyatt, and it's primarily locals. If you follow that up, right? So I'm saying that this thing about the carbon footprint is real. It is part of the legislation now that ensures that U.S. producers, because remember the U.S. took a long while to jump on this bandwagon. They resisted the Kyoto, they didn't sign the Kyoto Protocol, they floated around all the time. Once they caught that cold, they decided that all of us must take the same medicine. So if you are producing a mango locally and you want to sell that to the U.S., they're going to ask you all sorts of questions about how you produce the mango, which is standard. But in the packaging, they're going to ask you, is that paper from a sustainable forest? You know why? Because they're asking their own producers to account for the packaging that they use. So this is something very real at this step. It has taken a while to spill over into day-to-day transactions in the region. But I'm saying if we're talking about a new agriculture, if we don't want to be always playing catch-up, this is an opportunity for us to be on the crest of the wave. Because we keep doing that. I was talking with Dr. Chesney last night about this whole business about commodities. What we in the region have any right doing talking about commodities? Apart from Belize, maybe, and Guyana, and Suriname, what the hell are we doing talking about commodity? By definition, a commodity is something that is produced in such a way that it doesn't matter where it comes from, whoever has the lower price is the person in charge. We can't compete in that type of thing. We are looking for niche market. We are looking for an edge that keeps us out of the mainstream. We can't produce corn with the US. I mean, we can't produce pineapples with Brazil. I mean, what kind of madness is that? I am saying that if we had a pineapple variety that we commented on the nutritional value, the fact that it had a low carbon footprint, we could tackle a little niche market there just on that alone.
I think you touched on what I wanted to speak about. I think the problem with agriculture is that agriculture is driven by marketers. So if the marketers say organic, we run organic. Now the marketers are saying carbon footprint, so we run in carbon footprint. A banana was not a banana if it had a black spot. It wasn't good to eat, so we stopped eating bananas with black spots when we knew that was the sweetest banana. I think the problem that we are having is that we keep on following what the marketers are doing. So the marketers tell government, go tourism, everybody runs tourism. If the marketers say tomorrow, everybody jump off a cliff, we jump off the cliff. Because the economies are driven by marketers. Whoever comes up with the best marketing plan is who leads the way. So when the marketers come and they keep on telling us, no, go there, and we need, I think what we need to do is really look at our situation and come up with our own marketing blitz as to what the Caribbean can do. Because really and truly, when we talk about carbon footprint, do we have a carbon footprint? We don't even have a carbon footprint. Is planting a tree in St. Lucia or anywhere in the Caribbean really and truly going to affect what occurs in the developing countries and what they are doing? Can they really buy carbon credits?
Yes.
I think all of this is just really.
Yes.
How many trees can we plant to really offset what occurs in Europe and the US? The only way they can buy carbon footprints for me is by stopping it where they are. And we can buy carbon footprints for us here. But I don't think we, as 238 square miles and less, will affect anybody anywhere else. We're nobodies. But the only thing we can do, as far as I'm concerned, is what you were speaking about a little bit of, is niche. We niche whatever it is that we want to do, but we don't do it their way, because we've been doing it their way, and they create the laws in such a way that it took Europe, 40, 50 years to implement the SI unit. We had to do it in 2 years. And everybody had to go on. So how do we go SI? We put a jingle and coax on TV. Let's go metric, hey! And it took them 40, 50 years to go metric. And you want a seamstress who's been sewing for 50, 60 years to all of a sudden use a meter of cloth?
Thanks. I have some comments to make, and we're told this morning not to make a speech. But the fact is that so much has been said in this room that, it's very hard to decide where we start. I think what's going through my head, where we want to start it, what is the role of Caribbean agriculture? And I think for today, there may be three. I'm not going to go through them, please don't think so. We talk about food and nutrition security. That is our biggest issue at this time. More than 60-70% of our food coming from overseas. For me, the issue is not what we can send overseas as export crops, but what is it we can grow here to feed our people, to sustain livelihoods in rural areas. So we're talking about access, availability, everything is here. We talk about access and prices. So we're talking about commercialization and productivity and profitability and so on. A number of things have been said in this area in the last 5 minutes or so. We talk about seasonality. Seasonality as it relates to water, rainfall. How are we going to deal with that in terms of our production systems? We got a good example this morning which needs to be looked at and elaborated a little bit more or investigated. But you know, that's a green shade, but there was mention of water. There's an issue of rainwater harvesting, which is a regional initiative, and it seemed to have dropped by the side of the way because the Chinese no longer have the money or they're not interested. This is one of the issues we have. Everything is a project approach. There's no program approach, so we talk about measurements, but we don't have anything to measure because we only have 2 years data. So those are some of the things we need to look at. We talk about the issue of, we talk about IPM. From my eyes or at my knees, we're talking about IPM. It's not new, but nobody practices it because there are several except healing, right? IPM should be a way of life in this region. It's not there. It's important in the climate change issue. We have the issue with bees now and so on, pollination issue and so on. I'm going down quickly. I'm coming down to technology. Somebody spoke a lot about technology. The thing is, what are we doing about linking our agriculture? There's a very weak link between Caribbean agriculture and Caribbean research institutions. And I'm not saying just Cardi. We don't stop at Cardi. We have many universities around the region and associated with the region. And none of those universities, in my mind, are doing anything to change or come up with any new ideas, technology, innovation that can impact what is now required in agriculture. So what are we going to do about these weak linkages? It applies to the question the young lady raised a while ago, the delegate from over there. The issue of commercialization and productivity if we're going green. If we're going green, yeah, we're going green, but we have to eat. So there's the issue of productivity and there's the issue of commercialization if we're going green. So there we have a technology issue. How are we going to use this technology or whatever we come up with that is indigenous that will allow us to eat for years to come? And the other thing I had here was the whole issue of the land management, which is a broad issue. Water, biodiversity, etc., which we have not discussed. And what are the key issues in the land management and administration? We talk about reform of land policy. We have a land policy. I can speak for St. Lucia. St. Lucia has an excellent land policy since 2003. I hope I don't lose my passport for this. But it's sitting somewhere. Chris can support me. It needs to be looked at. We need to pull out those critical issues, be selfish, that relates to agriculture, so the next time we have a Thomas, we don't lose half of the country and half of our agriculture. You know, I think some of these, somebody mentioned coordination. The issue of coordination, coherence, linkages, intersectoral approaches. It's not beating the farmer over his head. The farmer knows. The farmer from Guyana, when I went to speak to him, he was telling me all about his association, his marketing, his networking. There's 128 of them. They're associated with some Israeli group. They might not be able to articulate it, but when you talk to them, they're doing things and they're getting things out. But there are some fundamental and enabling things that we need to look at in order to assist in this process of feeding ourselves. Thank you.
I fully agree and endorse some of the things that was said there, because I remember about a year ago we had a massive amount of fruit wastage in St. Vincent, and I suggested on the FAO blog that they come up with a system of fruit netting to address the issue of harvesting. And nobody picked it up. I sent it off to the University of West Indies. I got a call and days wait ended. Nobody ever really picked it up. And I think that what you're saying is a critical problem that we have. That we talk too much and we're really not doing a lot. That is really our problem. I'm now hearing in this discussion also sufficient being said of chemical use. We're using a lot of chemicals in the Caribbean. For every little color or the difference that you see on a plant, there's a chemical. And nobody is coming up with I haven't heard anybody talking about non-agricultural farming. Maybe doing some neem foresting, you know, where we could get into alternative forms of pest management. These things are not, we're talking food all the time again, and we're not talking nutrition. Belly full is killing us. 65+% of us are dying from non-communicable diseases because we're eating too much food. Where's the discussion? There's where this should be going.
There were a number of comments were made about my apparent preoccupation with carbon footprinting. And I make no apologies for it. I am a rampant capitalist. I would write, not alcoholic. But, no, because I recognize that commercial agriculture is a business activity. I think that there are waves that we have to ride. We can't always start those waves. We have to catch them before they crash, because we end up in the backwash all the time, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm saying that all of my interest in going green has to do with green, as in currency. All of this talk you hear me talking about going green, I am not a conservationist. I am not interested in how many sharks there are in the world, because I will still go by Richards on a Sunday to buy bacon shark until they kill the last shark. So I'm not a conservationist. I am one of those people who I am riding this wave because it is what is going now. It is the going thing now. When it was food safety, I knew that if I pick up enough mango and a little fella from in the drain and eat it, and ain't dead yet. So when they started with the food safety thing, and everybody wanted food safety, and they want you to pick it, and they want to have a toilet in the field, and you can't touch it with your hand, I went with that way because that is the way the thing was going. If you didn't do that, you would not sell the fruits. It was as simple as that. We are talking about these things as if they don't impact on us directly. I'll give you an example from Belize. I am down there in the citrus capital of Belize. And I'm talking to people there in Tarawe and telling them, look, with all of these things that are taking place internationally, you cannot go outside of your own house now, squeeze some juice from the very famous oranges from that area, put it into a bottle and sell it outside. Why? Because we have bought into these international conventions that says there's a standards bureau, there's a particular way to put the very best juice in the world into an ordinary glass bottle. Because if somebody drives along there, drinks that juice, and for whatever reason falls sick, you are at fault. Even though we know that is the best citrus in the world. That's the point. The fact is that we are buying bottled water now, which I find a travesty, right? With an expiry date on it. What does water change into when it expires? We have an expiry date on a batch date because the food health regulations say if water is going to be treated as a food item, you must have an expiry date on it, you must know a batch number, so that if we have to go back to find out that it really didn't have only water in it, and we have somebody liable, these are the people. So I am making no apologies for this. This thing is part of the way the world is spinning. You can either spin with the world, or you can jump up there and wait for it to reach some other point. I am one of those people who are jumping with it.
Yes, there was some talk about, yes, we needed to feed ourselves. We're talking about this green revolution and so on. At the end of the day, in reality, are we saying that productivity is so low when we actually go green? I mean, there are certain methodologies that exist. There are certain ways of doing things. I mean, for example, agroforestry. Even in the banana production right now, for a few years ago when they were doing that Europe Gap certification, a lot of those things were brought up. That these guys are telling you that you could actually reduce your incidence of things like this one if you have windbreaks. That the spread of the spots, the spread of the Sigatoka will actually be reduced. You understand that it would not cause that kind of big issue that you will find that if you have a monoculture spread over vast areas and you cannot differentiate one farm from the other. You understand? You also have an issue where, for example, a lot of the food that we consume presently are produced in some agroforestry framework or systems. Where you have, for example, a lot of the fruits that we consume are not grown in large model, well, some of them are, but you may find 1 or 2 or 3 crops being grown together, especially those fruit crops that we consume and we import a lot from the developed world. What I'm saying is, why can't we do the same here?
Yeah, okay, just to wrap up, it's hard to follow the act. The thing is, Carl raised a number of things, Steve, but maybe to tie these two across, right? I know what you just said, we've been saying that for years and years and years and years. Green really does translate into green money. For it to be green, you have to take out your pocket, right? And that's the problem we've had. We're trying to get farmers to grow sustainably and do the kind of things. You have to make an investment. And when you look for the money, you look for government. And you get caught in that kind of loop. And that's the thing, who's going to pay for these, what do you call this fancy term, who's paying for the environmental services at the end? Who you pass on the cost to the consumer? Is the consumer going to be willing to pay an extra premium for something that is grown in St. Lucia that meets the green criteria, less pollution and so on? That's the question. When we sold to farmers and so on, like us going out in the field as foresters, my job is secured, right? But they are hustling. And when you tell them, go and take out a piece of land to put some trees, they tell you, well, you're mad. That kind of thing, that's reality. So the green really comes at a cost, and who's going to pay for the cost? That's something that we need to figure out. That's where I'd like to see that incentive framework that it works not only within the agriculture sector, but it has to translate and transition across, say for example, into the hospitality. So you coming in as a hotel investor, these linkages, in other words, you getting some sort of premium product that you're linking with the farmers, so that you can, as a hotelier, maybe help them to pay for some of these ecological services that would benefit not only the visitor but the environment in the long run. And finally, just to say, I believe that going green necessitates a fundamental core personal belief. Right? That is what is lacking. I know my own solutions. I find that in the daily practices of what they do in terms of waste management and so on, there's a fundamental disregard to even the concept of environment. So to build upon this green philosophy requires, I think, some level of it. But again, the biggest factor is the dollars and cents, the green in that. Okay, so that's where Steve makes a very valid point.
Once again, let's hear it for the
And just some housekeeping manners, let us thank Stephen. I wouldn't attempt to try his glass thing again. But let us thank Stephen for his I know he had a time in English, but he did pretty very well, didn't he?
Pretty very well.